Peggy Noonan is a Wall Street Journal columnist and CBS News contributor. All right, Peggy, so Mr. Trump was clear that he would sue these accusers after Election Day. What did you make of those comments from him?
Well, I just found it somewhat astounding that in his bigly billed closing argument, in his big speech, which had been very seriously put forward to the press as a big speech at Gettysburg, he spent time talking about these issues that are his immediate political problem, and they've got him all riled up. But I think he should not have been talking about those things, but about the larger issues that have to do with people on the ground in America and Trump voters and those considering voting for Trump. So I just thought that was an odd lost opportunity, I think, Elaine. Beyond that, I guess he'll sue somebody after the election is over. He seems to enjoy suing people.
Peggy, I wonder what your sense is of the tone that Trump's campaign wants to set in these final days of the election.
Well, we've got 2 weeks. You ought to be, wherever you stand in the polls in politics, you ought to be making a valiant effort, you know? You ought to be putting your best foot forward every day. You ought to be talking about how huge the stakes are. You ought to be talking about what is not working in America, why America feels so alienated from Washington and angry at Washington and distrustful towards Washington. You ought to be talking about as he did somewhat in that speech, but it was the second half of the speech. It should be the first half. He ought to be talking about what he will do to make it better. You ought to fight valiantly right to the end. You may get lucky, you may not, but you ought to be elevating your campaign and not just mucking around, you know, at the bottom.
Let me ask you about Hillary Clinton. We learned that her campaign is now making a push into Utah. She had First Lady Michelle Obama campaign for her in Arizona last week. Yeah. And the campaign is also putting resources into Texas. What do you think that signals, Peggy?
Yeah, and I think President Obama was just down in Florida. The Texas foray is interesting. That's almost a little bit trolling. It's almost a little bit taunting. And yet, the Texas polls, the latest one I saw was pretty close. I think it is our CBS Battleground one, 43-46 with Trump in the lead in Texas. But a Republican ought to have a more solid, more comfortable, be in a more solid, more comfortable position than that. So you know, with some spirit she's going down there. What I think mostly she's doing, people say she's trying to go for a mandate. Maybe she is. But I think she's paying attention to serious and important Senate races now. She's probably thinking that she's going to win. And if she wins, it would be a really nice thing for her if she had a slightly Democratic Senate and not a barely or slightly Republican Senate. So I think she may spend a bit of the next 2 weeks pushing on that, trying to get Democratic senators elected. That's a little bit, that wouldn't be a cost-free decision. She might make it look like she's being too partisan. And this is all about the Democratic Party, and the Democrats are going to take over now. It's going to be a Democratic sweep. As I read America, people don't necessarily want one party to sweep everything. So she could, I suppose, be overplaying her hand there. We'll see.
Interesting, Peggy. On this notion of targeting the Senate, Hillary Clinton has long portrayed Donald Trump as an outlier, essentially, from the GOP. Now, though, she's trying to yoke Mr. Trump to the party and go after Republicans who back him. Saturday, for example, she went after Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. And let's play a little bit of that for our viewers.
Pat Toomey heard Donald attack a grieving Gold Star family who lost their son in Iraq. He heard Donald call Mexican immigrants rapists. He heard him say terrible things about women. He heard him spread the lie that our first black president wasn't really born in America. Now, how much more does Pat Toomey need to hear? If he doesn't have the courage to stand up to Donald Trump after all this, then can you be sure he'll stand up for you when it counts against?
All right, so President Obama, as you know, Peggy, has been doing this for months. You just mentioned this notion of possibly overplaying one's hand when it comes to this issue, given the appetite out there among the electorate. What do you make of the timing of this from Hillary Clinton right now?
Well, she's got 2 weeks to go, and again, I think the Senate is much on her mind. I think she can't, she's an old hand at politics, and that's politicking. She's trolling a little bit. She's trying to put Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, an important state, with a close Senate election going on. She's trying to put him on the defensive, trying to put him up against the wall and have to answer media questions the next hour and the next day about his position on Donald Trump, whose fortunes don't look so good at the moment. We'll see how it goes, but if trends continue, that probably won't work. But heck, she's doing politics. When she makes the argument that she makes with all the things Donald Trump has said over the past 15 or 16 months on the campaign trail, I don't know if that will be re-electrifying for people, or if they'll say, oh, I've heard that a million times. I'm sort of tired of that. But what she's doing seems to me to be standard, reasonable politics in going forward in this way and paying attention to the Senate. But she has 2 weeks now, and we'll see if in that time she starts to overplay her hand a little bit.
All right. Peggy Noonan in Washington. Peggy, always great to have your insight. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.